Hello and welcome to GryphonArt. Today's project has been inspired by someone very dear to me who told me that she needed to be able to gift wrap a ball, and that naturally set my mind thinking in terms of gift boxes. After a few trials and errors, I came up with this particular shape, and that ended up forming the basis for this almost ball-shaped box. So before we get creative, perhaps we could just take a quick look at how this particular box works. Its closing mechanism is actually kept in place by this little piece of ribbon. So we have a small closing flap here through which that ribbon passes, and then by removing that ribbon from the two first flaps, we can open the space of that box to reveal quite a good space. You can get your fingers either side of what's inside it, which in this case is one of those bath bombs, or I think sometimes they're called bath creamers. So that's essentially how the box works. I'll just actually I won't put it together again because it takes a little time, and you'll see how it goes together with the one that we're making next. So the first thing that we're going to do is to start with a piece of cardstock that's been cut down to 7 inches by 9 inches. So that's been cut from a standard piece of A4 card. Now I will be including all the card sizes in a table at the end of this video tutorial so that you'll have reference to information in that respect, and I'll include some diagrams and things to help you as well, so you shouldn't need to take any notes during this tutorial. Now if we just quickly take a look at this box, you can probably see that it basically comprises of a grid of, in this case, 1-inch squares. So we could go ahead and just score this piece of card at 1-inch markers, turn it and score again, so we end up with that grid. But I'm a little bit mean and I do like to conserve card where I can, so I'm going to be scoring this card in such a way that I can cut away some of the scrap in larger amounts. So don't feel that you have to do this, but if you are like me and you like to conserve your card, then this is the approach I'm going to be taking. So I'm going to be working in portrait mode first. So we've got the 7-inch width across the top of our scoring board, and I'm going to score at 2, 3, 4 and 5 inches. And that's essentially giving me this long edge to my box, which comprises of 3 squares. So the next thing I'm going to do is turn that card anti-clockwise, and I'm going to start scoring at 4 inches, and I'm going to do a complete grid here. So we're going to go with 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 inches. I can now turn that anti-clockwise again to its original position to complete the grid at the 1-inch mark. So I'm going to just score down to the 5-inch mark, so down to this last horizontal line. So 1 inches down to 5 inches, and at 6 inches down to 5 inches, which gives me that complete top section as a 1-inch grid. So if I now turn that card anti-clockwise again, I can start to address these 3 columns here that are 3 rows here that are still not a complete grid. And because I'm scoring midpoint on my scoreboard, I'm just going to use a ruler to help me line things up top and bottom, and then I'm just scoring here from the 2-inch horizontal line to the 5-inch horizontal line. So I'm doing that at 6 inches, This ruler just helps me find that groove on my scoreboard. So that's 6 inches. Again, it's 7 inches. And then finally at 8 inches. Now that actually completes all of my straight line scores. But if I just show you this, and this does include the embellishment pattern as well, but this is the pattern that I will be providing as a still at the end of these video clips. Now this is the white squares here are the area of my pattern, and I'm hoping that you can see that I need some of these diagonal lines to be put in place as well, and for that I'm going to need to know the 1/2 inch points on the 2 inch line and also on the 5 inch line. So that's what we're going to tackle next. Now because I'm going to be making a little mark, I want it to be quite a small mark, I've swapped to this more pointed bone folder for that purpose. Now if you're using a scoreboard and you know you've got the standard Martha Stewart scoring tool, then you might want to find something slightly sharper, and a knitting needle or something along those lines would probably fit the bill nicely. Right, so I know that these markers are at the odd numbers point if I've left my card in place at that last set of score lines. So again, it is, as I said, it's at the 2 inch line from this left hand side, that 2 inch horizontal line and the 5 inch horizontal line. So I'm going to start at the 7.5 inch point, and again I'm going to be using my ruler as a guide because I haven't got the edges of my card at this point. So it's just the 7.5. I just want an indication, and that's at the 2 inch point and now on that 5 inch line, which you can probably see from my ruler actually. So now we've done that set of squares, so that column, we're going to miss a set and do the next one. So it's 5.5, so with odd numbers. So then we miss a set, so we're missing the 4 to 5, we're doing the 3 to 4, so 3.5 inches. 2 inch line and the 5 inch line. And the last one, so we're missing one, and the last one we're doing is at the 1.5 inch line. So that's at 2 inches and at 5 inches. So if you've been watching any of my other videos, you'll know that I prefer to put in those diagonal lines with my self-heal mat, and so we'll just put the scoring board out of the way. So I'll just draw your attention back to this pattern that I've created, and this shows those diagonal lines. So we've just put in that little marker there, let me use my bone folder, that little marker point there and that little marker point there, and I'm now going to create these lines. So I'll do one set and then I can do the rest off camera and come back to you at that point. So let's just start with one set. Now ordinarily, because these will fold the other way, I would flip my card over, but actually I found it hasn't made much difference for these little ones. So I'm sticking with the wrong side of my card to score these lines. The only thing I would say is that you do need to be very firm with your scoring here, because if you're gentle and have that tendency to be gentle, you might just struggle to fold and crease them when that point comes. There. Okay, so that shows you that pattern that's been created. I'll do the other set and then I can fold and crease some of my straight line pattern and come back to you at that point. So that's all of those little diagonal markings put in, and the only other thing that I've done whilst off camera is I've folded and creased that line, which is going to form an edge of that large triangle of rectangle of card that I want to save. I've done the same on the other side, and I've also folded and creased that, and that now enables me to get rid of these excess pieces of card. So all I'm going to now do is cut along that fold line, but I'm going to also cut away all evidence of that fold line, so treat that as unwanted as well. I'm going to try and make a neat job of this because these edges that I'm leaving behind will be forming the top and bottom of the box, so that's either the top or the bottom. So that, we will need a little bit of that later, so don't throw it away. Well, you've gone to a lot of trouble to save it, so I doubt you will, but there you go. So I'm now going to repeat that to this side here to save that piece, and at that point I can then put in all my straight line folds and creases. So I may as well do that off camera because it's straightforward, and I'll come back to you after that's completed. So that's everything, all those straight lines folded and creased. And for those of you who are new to box making, when you do this, just make sure that you're lining everything up and keeping that grid pattern in a straight line form. As long as everything is square, when it's folded over as well, you should end up with a square box. Now, we have still got some excess card on this pattern, and that's what we're going to deal with next. So first of all, wherever we've got one of these pointed angles, as here, we need the space above it to be clear, otherwise we're not going to be able to fold this as necessary. So in order to do that, we're going to actually, in this case, leave that fold line intact. So just double check, that's the one, second one in. I'll do one for you and then show you. So this is my fold line. This is the bit that I'm getting rid of, these two squares. So this time I'm going to carefully cut down so that I leave that fold line intact along both sides. And I'll show you in a minute why I've opted to do that, so that you can make a qualified decision as to whether you do the same. It's a tiny thing, but you know, some people say it's in the detail. So in this case, we're marrying up with this piece we cut away earlier. So at the bottom here, we're going to take away all evidence of that fold line in the normal way that we do. Okay, so if I just show you why I've decided to do that. This box here was one of my earlier boxes, and in this case I didn't include the fold line. You know, I cut it away, and that's actually made this flap section thinner, and it just leaves this gap either side of on these panels. Now it's probably hardly noticeable, but you know, we strive for perfection. So if I then compare that with this box, this is a later one that I made, the fold lines are actually intact, and you've got a much closer join on all four sides of that square. It almost looks there as if, you know, there is no flap, so you've got more of a concealed closure. Let's put them side by side. So it is a little thing, and it's very personal, so it's up to you what you do, but that's the actual end result of opting to leave them in at this stage. Right, so if we return to our pattern, I need to continue and do exactly what I've just done here with these areas above the other triangular section. So I'm going to do that off camera and then I'll come back to you at that point. Right, so that's the area above our triangular sections removed, which is the first thing we need to do. We can now just sort out the remaining excess card that we don't need. We'll start with these end sections. This middle section is going to form our flap top and bottom. So one will be glued and one will open and shut our box. So we still need two sections there, but for the other two pieces, we only need one of these square sections. And I'm back to my old habits now of cutting away the fold line. So I'm cutting away that top square, and we're creating something symmetrical. So at this point, so I'm going to also cut away this bottom square. So that's on that extreme left. Now we can do a similar thing here, except that in order to prevent a layering effect on the outside of our box, I'm going to take slightly more off this one. So maybe an extra 1/8 of an inch, somewhere in that region. It will become clear, you know, as we progress. So I've done that to that side. Symmetry is required, so I'm going to do the same to this end. Just lay that down so you can see what's going on. Now we do deal at this point with the top and bottom slightly differently. In both of these cases, we cut away the fold line. There wasn't one here because it was the edge of our card, but so we've still got a fold line retained on this side here and this side here. So we're just going to angle those slightly to cut that off. And I try and leave as much card on my box as possible, because I generally think that the more card, the stronger your box is. So I'm not trying to angle it too steeply. There we go. So I'm now also going to leave these, I want these fold lines intact, but I don't want anything here, so I'm going to similarly angle these. Just into that corner. And I'm also going to just cut a little bit off this end here so that it doesn't interfere with the fold line below it when the box is put together. So that's the bottom of our box ready to go. So we can now tackle the top shape. And we're going to do a similar thing. Angle these slightly, not too heavily, but we're doing both sides in this case. So, try and get a bit of a move on. Same this side. And we're going to do the same to this top edge as well. Oops, pinging everywhere. And then the only thing I'm going to do now is just angle these. This is really purely for aesthetics, so you know, if you don't like it, you don't want to do it, leave this section out. But I'm just sort of trimming back the corners. I don't drop it. And that's essentially our shape ready. We've cut away all the card that we need to cut away. So the next thing that we need to do to finish the box pattern is to return to those diagonal folds that we created earlier. And if you have made up my A5 milk carton, any of the A5 milk carton series, you'll be familiar with this fold, but I'll go through it for those of you who haven't encountered it before. Now, all of these folds, oh, having said that, that looks like I've missed one there. Let's just quickly crease these. I was supposed to have done these before. I obviously got so far and didn't finish off. Right, so yes, those are all. So all those folds you can see are in place, and this is the outside of my box. Now, to form these diagonals, we just need to encourage that fold by applying pressure either side of it until we can pinch it so that it's flat. Then once you've got a flat edge, you can put it onto a firm surface and use a bone folder or something similar to thoroughly crease that line. And do try and get into the corners here, because that will help form that round shape to your box. So let's just do another. So just fold it till you can pinch it, place it on a flat surface and just apply pressure. I'll do a couple until I get into the middle of the box, because they can get trickier into the middle of the box. But if you are really struggling with these folds, it could simply be that you've been quite gentle when you've been scoring your lines. So if that's the case, you might find it easier if you just go back to your ruler and bone folder and just rescore those lines, and they should, as you can see there, they should really fall into place fairly readily. So there we go. So there's a few of those done. I'm going to go off camera and do the rest so that it saves your time, and I'll come back to you at that point. So that's all of those little diagonal score lines folded and creased, and I've also started to put, or I've actually put all of my double-sided tape in place ready for when I assemble the box. And this is going to help me when I come to do my embellishments, because I can clearly see that this panel here doesn't need any embellishments. Now I would just like to show you so that you're aware of why I've done things certain ways. I'm going to place this panel underneath this one when I come to join the box together, and that's because I feel that it's neater with these flaps hiding that top edge. You know, there's some that may say there's no reason why it couldn't be done the other way, but I just feel it's not quite so neat in that way. So that's why I've chosen to have that longer flap being the one that overlaps the shorter flap. So I'm hoping that sort of clarifies that for you. So we've got the double-sided tape on these little flaps on the decorative side of our box as well, because that's just the way everything goes together. And I've also put some double-sided tape on the inside of my box, and this end because I use an overlapping method of adhesion, which will become clear later. So one of the final things that we need to tackle before embellishment is to just sort out the first of the series of holes that will contain our ribbon that holds our box closed. And all I've done in order to help me with that is I've taken an inch square piece of scrap card and I've just drawn across the diagonals to find the center and punched a hole in the center. That then means that because this is the same size as that top section there, I can place that where I know that hole is going to be centrally positioned, just hold onto it, and using my 1/8 of an inch hole punch, I can line that up over that hole so that it fits. The punch is going to fit through that hole again clearly, and then just punch. That hole on that scrap piece remains the same, and I end up with a nice centrally positioned hole on the top of my closing flap. Now there's one last thing that I need to do before I can consider that my box is ready for assembly, irrespective of what embellishments I may be planning to do. And that is to create a stay for this flap here. And that stay will go, if I just put this, will need to go on the opposite cell in the box. So if I just explain the reason why I've decided to include a stay, you may choose not to do this part, but again, it has to be your decision. What tends to happen is that without a stay, and I'll show you the stay in this particular box here, but without a stay, this flap tends to bend at 90 degrees into the box, so that when you then hold it by this ribbon, it can lift up like that, so you don't get a nice flush finish. So it's by simply adding a stay, and I'll take this apart so you can see it. It's just a little bit of card on the inside of the box that flap can then rest in. That keeps the flap against the outside of the box, and it just stops it from pulling upwards with that ribbon like that. So that's why I added, and that's what we're going to tackle next. So in the first instance, I've just used a scrap piece of card. It's one of these pieces that we saved earlier, and I've just scored a line across the top at 1/4 inch point, and I'm just going to fold that over now, and let's just move that out of the way, and put a crease in that just as a guideline for cutting, really. So it doesn't really matter whether you cut down the middle of the score line, or it's just a little bit of card that you need to act as a stay. So the rest of that is spare, we just need that little bit. Now, also retrieving some of the card that we had earlier, I'm going to temporarily use one of these pieces that we cut away from our box. Let's first of all look at where we need to place that stay. So it's on that opposite side, so it's going to be in this section here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this piece of thin strip of card around that cutaway piece that we put to one side earlier, to ascertain where it's going to need to have those lines folded. So if I just leave that aside for a minute, if I then place that roughly in position, I'm going to bring that up to the camera for you. I'm hoping that you can see that it's too long. It's going to interfere with these fold lines here. So we're just going to trim off either end to leave enough card for us to glue with, but not so much that it's going to interfere with these diagonal fold lines. So that's what we're doing now. Right, so all I'm going to do is put a little bit of glue on one end here, just PVA, nice strong glue, and I'm going to put this in place as well because it'll help. So just set that in place, lining it up with that particular square cell, slightly down from the top as well. And I'm just going to use my bone folder to apply some pressure down the side of this shape as well, to form a sort of lip that the little flap of ours can then sit inside once the box is assembled. So once that's gone off, I can then apply some glue to this end as well. Leave this piece of card in place. Just put that straight across it. It can be reasonably tight because once you bend the box into its constructed shape, this stay will become looser. So I can now slide that out of there, and that stay is ready to go. And if I just show you, if I bend that box, you might not be able to see actually, but it normally becomes slightly more roomy once the sides of the box have been bent, so that will be fine. Right, so that's our box pattern now completed, and it's either ready for embellishment or construction. And because we're going to be using flat style embellishments that don't go over any of these fold and score lines, we're going to embellish first. Now I am using a couple of die cutters for my embellishments, and the first of these, if I show you the box, so we're going to be creating these little cut and embossed squares that just add some definition to some of these cell areas. And to create those, I've just used a Spellbinders Nestabilities Classic Squares Large, and it is the very smallest of those die cuts. They're very thin, sort of framelit style die cuts, but I'll put information in the description area for you so you know exactly what die cuts have been used. The second of those die cuts, which is actually this little flower thing, is part of a poppy stamps range called Garden Bouquet, and it's something I'm using quite a lot of at the moment, but I'm using this flower that I've never used before. Now let me just show you. So that comes, I hope you can see if I place it against the white, that comes as a separate set. You've got this corner section and then you've got this separate set here, and that flower is just tucked on the end. So again, it's a thin framelit style die, and I'll put the description of that in the description area for the video. So that's our die cuts. Now, as you saw earlier, I have created some diagrams, and this one indicates SQ for squares and FLs for flowers, and that will be included as a still at the end of this set of video clips. So you know, it will be there. You can probably screen dump it or something if you need to, and particularly if you want to follow this form of embellishment for this box. So that's going to be there for you. Now you do need to have 6 of those flower shapes as die cuts, and you need 12 of those little square shapes. And I'm going to start out with a flower, and I'm also going to prepare the flower for this top part of the box, because we will be setting that aside. We won't fit that last flower until the box is ready assembled. Now I am going to be using my 1/8 of an inch stamp for this punch for this as before, and actually this little bit in the middle is not very big, and I found that it's not quite easy to centralize that hole. So the best way that I found around that problem is to mark a little pencil mark roughly, or as accurately as possible, in the center of this flower. So I'm going to do that. Okay, I don't know whether you can see that. I'm just going to get a pen actually, and I'll do it with a pen. It's something I hadn't anticipated with this foil card, but I'm hoping that you can just roughly see that dot in the middle. So what I can then do is place this little guide that I used earlier so that I can see that that dot is centrally placed within that hole. And I can then apply the same technique as I did before with my punch, just lining it up, ensuring that it passes through that same hole again. And that means that the hole in the center of my flower is probably as centrally placed as I'm going to get it. So I'm just going to set that aside for later, and you know, we'll see how we apply that at that point. So returning to my box, I will just apply a couple of these just to show you the method that I use, and then I'll do it mainly off camera because it's time consuming. So I do keep a piece of kitchen roll or other absorbent towel handy, because I tend to use quite a lot of glue, as you're about to see. PVA, let's get hold of that. So this is my fiddly little flower, and I put on quite a lot of glue because I want the whole of this back surface to be sticky. I don't want any dry places that are going to lift. So once I've done that, I can just spread that glue and make sure that it is covering every aspect of the back of this embellishment. And evidently there's way too much glue there. So at that point, I'm just going to rest it down on this absorbent towel so that any excess glue is then removed. And I could do that a couple of times. The PVA actually takes a long time to go off, so you can hopefully see now there's not too much glue left on there at all. And I'm just going to line that up in the section for one of the flowers. And I've done enough of these now that I don't really need to do a dry run, but you know, if you're using these embellishments, you might want to just do a dry run first before you're familiar with how they position within these squares. So that's one of the flowers ready to go. So I can now do a square, and that's pretty much following the same process. I do like to get plenty of glue into the corners, taking a risk doing it above my box actually in case I drop it, but it's the corners that tend to not stick down, if anything. So there's not a lot of excess there, but I don't want it to ooze, so I will just get rid of that excess piece. Now I know that this is square, as are the cells on my box where they're going to be positioned. So as long as I line this up so that I've got an equal amount framing on 3 sides, I can then hold that edge in place and let the other side drop down, and it will automatically be positioned where I want it to be. Now I am going to apply a little bit of pressure with my bone folder, but only along the outside edge, because the middle of these little squares has been embossed, and if I apply the pressure into the middle, I'm going to lose that embossed aspect. So there we are. That's the first 2 embellishments applied, and that's the method that I employ for both. So there's no point in me repeatedly showing you that. All I will now say is that you'll have a pattern for reference, but I tend to work with all the squares first because they're just situated in a diagonal form. So once you've got that first one in, it's just working through the diagonals. There's a complete diagonal there, you can see, and it just leaves the spaces for the flowers. So I'm going to go ahead, put all of those on off camera, and I'll come back to you at that point. So apart from that remaining top flower, that's all of our embellishments applied, and I can now start to look at assembling the box. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put some glue down this side here where that double-sided tape is. So again, it serves as a good reminder where I need to be applying my adhesion. So I'm bringing that glue to this edge here, and not worrying too much about the other edge because that'll be covered by the overlap. So I can now do the same to this inside piece. I'm just going to tuck these flaps back so they don't get covered in glue unnecessarily. So then I can just remove that backing tape from the double-sided tape, both sides, and then I'm just going to line these edges up, making sure my fold lines tie up, but also what I try and do is push that edge against that fold line to form almost an invisible seam. It's not going to happen absolutely perfectly, but you know, it will help the closer that you can get it to that raised edge. And once it's down, I'm just going to use my bone folder along that edge just to apply that pressure. Now I'll just leave that for a second or two before I start to tackle the bottom. So we can now tackle that base. Now that side's gone off a bit, which is good. And with the base, we've got this small one flap smaller than the other, and those are the two that we're putting down first. So double-sided tape again is an indication of where the glue needs to go. So in this case, I'm just going to put glue on this side. Now remove the backing tape from the double-sided tape in both cases. And because I didn't take any excess off here, that can push right against the other side of the box here. And also because we didn't take any excess off the sides here, only off one side, we can use those to line up. And that should position our base properly by just doing those two things. That should give us exactly what we need. So again, it's worth just giving that a minute to go off before we start folding these folds in place. Now once you're sure that that's dried out enough for you to fiddle with these folds, it is probably best to do a dry run just to check, to see how everything's fitting together, to see whether anything just needs trimming back a bit. But actually I think you can see that's reasonably okay. The fit here is going to be slightly low, but that's quite normal by the time you've got the bottom together. So I can go ahead now and glue the rest of this up. Now I glue this top section last because I don't want it to become too moist before I apply it to this side. So we'll put some glue here first. I'll just take that double-sided tape backing off ready, just in case I forget. And then I'll apply some glue here as well. Particularly along that top edge there. At that point, remove the backing tape again. And we're just going to fit that in place as we did before. Gently slide that all together. It does tend to alter once that glue's in place because it's drying out a bit, so just push that edge right in and then hold it in place, and then that double-sided tape will grab it a bit, and I just then like to put down these edges. These are those fold lines that we left in place, so we can just use our bone folder to create a nice edge. And then that glue will just go off. And that's our base done. Now we need to repeat that dry run to the top so that we can form our holes. Now the longer of these two flaps goes underneath because it's going to push against the edge here. So the first set of holes that we're going to do will be on this short flap. So we're just going to close that box up into position. And you want to get this nice and neat at the top here. So that, because this is, once you've put this hole in place, that is where it's going to be. So once you're sure of where that position is, we're just going to repeat that process that we did before, create a pencil mark in the top there to indicate where that punch needs to go. Then we can open our box up again, and look, that's actually the long flap that's slipped underneath. So let's just do it the right way. It's something you need to watch out for, because that shorter flap does tend to want to go underneath. So, but it can alter the way it folds, so you do need to get it round the right way. So we've got our pencil mark on there, and you can see which one's which because this is off center more so than the other one. So we can now use our card and just place it over that pencil hole so that that's now in the center. And then we're going to do exactly as we did before. Position that punch over that hole, and there we go. So that's the first of our holes. Now we'd better double check this one, I think. So that's to go underneath. Hopefully we'll be able to see that other one. Actually, that looks as if it is okay. So we'll just reinforce it. I know it has put it in a different position. What I think I'll do is I'm just going to stop the camera and I'll rub off that previous mark, and then we can do that one from the start. Right, so yeah, I've cleared that mark off there so that we're back to a sort of level playing field, as it were. So I'm just going to put that back together. So the ones with the holes on already at the top, just fasten that back up where it needs to go. Just make sure that I'm happy with the shape on the top here. Take a little bit of time if necessary to position that nice and tightly. Then I can take my pencil and create that mark, and that should go through both those holes now. So we can get our final. So you can see that hole positioned there. So I'm now going to do that off camera, and then I'll put the final flower embellishment, line it up over this hole here, and that will have a chance to go off before we put our ribbons through. So I'll be back with you in a second. Right, so that's that final hole punch. So we've now got holes on both our flaps and one in the top, and I've also put that final flower embellishment so it lines up with that hole in the top as well. So that means that we're now ready to sort out our ribbon. Now for that, I've just taken a length of 3mm wide satin ribbon, and that's 7 inches in length, and I'm simply going to fold that in half. Just bring those ends together, and I'm going to form a knot. So it's quite straightforward and simple, and I'm going to try and make sure that that knot is quite a way down toward the end. So I'm going to hold on to those two end pieces and gradually just draw that ribbon through and push that knot downwards until I'm happy that it's far enough down that I can pull it tight. And that's our ribbon ready to be threaded through. So all I'm going to do now is crease that halfway point, so I've got something that makes threading a little bit more easy. And then I'm just going to simply thread that through that largest flap, which we know wants to sit on the bottom. I can then put in the gift, so our bath bomb, so in that goes. Thread that through that next little flap. Now there will be some resistance in this box forming its shape because it's the first time it's come together, but you know, as it sits in that form, it will sort of remember the shape. It's a bit weird, but there, that's how it works. So I can then pop that flap in there to close it, and as long as you pull the ribbons taut and you've got your holes in the right place, everything should line up beautifully, and you have something that will hang. So you've got your embellishment on the bottom as well, and that's your finished box. Now before I show you the other colorways, I just want to remind you that there will be tables in the next few clips that give you the card size you require, show you the embellishment pattern, and show you what bits of card you need to cut away once you've scored. So that done, I can start to just quickly show you some of my other colorways. Now I shortchanged you a little bit on colorways last week, so I've done plenty for you this week. So I think you did catch a little glimpse of this one. So we've got the green and the copper. There's a black and gold, champagne sort of gold, and I've done the inverse of that as well, so just to show you how they can look quite different with the opposite colorways. So you've got those two. Let's just put them on their sides a bit as well. I've got this blue and navy one, or turquoise and navy one, that you perhaps caught a glimpse of earlier. I've got a ginger and pink one, so a little bit unusual, but I actually quite like that combination. It's quite pretty. And then I've got a red and white one, so quite Scandinavian there, and perhaps give you an idea of a Christmas tree decoration in some respects. So that's that one, put that way you can see it. And finally, I've got this silver and copper as well. So a few options for you there. So as always, thank you very much for watching that video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you can take that idea further yourself, and also that perhaps you can join me next time. Thank you very much.